Julia Rawson was a happy, bright young woman who seemingly vanished following a warm day in May of 2019. Investigators began to retrace her steps, unaware that they were about to unfold one of the darkest cases they'd ever encountered. Julia had walked into what they described as the flat of horrors, becoming the pawn in the acting out of a heinous monster's twisted fantasy. Hello and welcome to the Little Shop of Crime, curators and purveyors of all things macabre and mysterious. We're going back to the UK and to another particularly disturbing British case. Now, I live here, I feel safe here, and thankfully violent homicides are really rare. And I don't know why, we have a habit of producing some of the most depraved killers I've ever researched. But first, some quick shopkeeping. My name is Steve, and I offer interesting true crime cases each week. Usually solved, but occasionally mysterious, so if that sounds like your thing, you know what to do. And if you'd like to get in touch, check the description or find me on any of the usual social media platforms. And if you have any case suggestions you might like me to cover, feel free to drop them in the comments below. Okay, let's investigate. This is the tragic case of Julia Rawson. After last week's case, we head back across the big drink and back to the UK, and more specifically to England. We've been to the north of England and we've been to the south, but today we are heading to the Midlands and to the market town of Dudley, which lies 8 miles west of Birmingham, one of the country's largest cities. Dudley. It's old. It was a major town in the Middle Ages, even getting a shout out in the Domesday Book in 1086. It's got history, a castle, the 12th century priory ruins, and even a huge village-sized outdoor historical museum. A big player in the Industrial Revolution, it's now your pretty typical English town with sports venues, a zoo, a large shopping centre, and the usual smattering of entertainment venues. It's a fair size with a population of a few 100,000. And back in 2019, one of these residents was Julia Rawson. Known affectionately as Juju, Julia was a 42-year-old market trader in Dudley and one of 3 siblings. I know it's standard procedure to describe someone favourably when memorialising them, but researching this case made me realise the scale of the positive impact she had on the people close to her. One friend, when asked to describe her in one word, said that she was sunshine. She was known for being kind, easygoing, and somebody who would quickly make friends with anyone she met. Julia was also immensely creative. She was a talented musician with the ability to play by ear, and she was also a massive art enthusiast, spending a lot of her time exploring galleries and exhibitions. She even had her own drawings displayed at local art shows. And on Saturday the 11th of May 2019, Julia spent the afternoon in nearby Wolverhampton with her long-term girlfriend Elaine. After this, Elaine went back to her own house and Julia made her way back to Dudley. And that would be the last time any of her loved ones would ever see her again. Julia stopped responding to messages later that night, and when the following day came with no response, her friends really started to worry. They walked her usual routes from home and around town to see if they could find any sign of her. She was known to be pretty independent, but she also failed to show up for work, which was really unlike her. And after 3 days, a worried friend reported her missing to the West Midlands Police on Tuesday, May 14th, and a missing person inquiry commenced. Investigators began to retrace her steps using CCTV. Shortly before her disappearance, she was shown getting on a bus bound for Dudley Town Centre. They managed to follow her through the town where she stopped at the Bottle and Cork pub just after 8 p.m. She then spent a while chatting to an unknown man at the bar. At about 10:45 p.m, cameras captured another man walking towards the pub before entering. her attention then went to this man, and they began to strike up a conversation. He very quickly went on to become a significant person of interest, since they left the pub together at 2 a.m, getting into the same taxi. This would be the last time she was ever seen alive. Inconveniently, the man spent the vast majority of the time at the bar with his head hidden behind a massive light fitting. But crucially, he did show off his distinctive arm tattoos to Julia. Stills from the footage of the unknown man were shared on social media in the hopes that someone local might have some information. Nobody came forward. They were also shown to Julia's friends, none of whom knew who he was. The footage was then shown to people who worked in Dudley town centre, and eventually a security guard working in the town centre on the 22nd of May, 11 days after her disappearance, alerted police to a male who matched the description. Police were immediately dispatched to the location, and they were able to intercept the man who was shopping in the town with his boyfriend.
Missing.
We're looking for a female missing person who's been missing for about 11 days. Okay. We've got pictures on CCTV with someone that matches your description with her, so we just want to get some details from her.
11 days?
She's been missing for 11 days, so obviously we need to find her. Okay. And because you look like the person we've seen on CCTV, we just want to get some details off you, alright?
I'll probably chop all my hair off.
What's the name of her?
Julia Rawson.
Who?
Julia.
Julia? Julia Wilson?
Rawson.
Rawson.
Do you know anyone by that name?
The only women I know are just my family or his family, I know.
Right.
This is my partner.
Okay.
Tattoos. Match.
Yeah.
Perfect. Hello.
Yeah. You got his details?
No, I'm going to get it. Oh, no, get it.
What's your name, please?
Hope I'm going to give details on my name.
Because you're very similar to the person that was
No, but just for looking like someone, I don't really want to...
No, I know, but we also can help.
The officers reviewed the footage at the scene, and given the similar appearance, particularly the distinctive tattoos, they were confident he was the man in the CCTV footage. And since they lived together, police arrested both 30-year-old Nathan Maynard-Ellis and his 25-year-old partner David Leesley on suspicion of the kidnap of Julia. Naturally, the first port of call was to check their home, a flat on a leafy little street called Mission Drive. It might look quaint on the outside, but inside was a different story. It quickly became apparent that Nathan had an obsession with true crime. Nothing wrong with that, but he took it to a far more sinister level. There was pornographic material on the subject of necrophilia, hundreds of macabre books, some of which indicated that Nathan was what police described as forensically aware. He'd once even taken a course on forensics. He was evidently fascinated with serial killers and cannibalism. The flat was littered with creepy doll heads, plaster cast hands, Chucky dolls, and an assortment of tools. Even he would have thought it was disturbing. There were reptiles in tanks, extreme gore horror films, and the walls were adorned with stuffed creatures, knives, saws and axes, and the grotesque face masks of characters from amateur horror films Nathan used to make. After his arrest, it came out that Nathan had been seeing a therapist due to some dark thoughts he'd been having, including murder and torture. He kept diary entries of his sickest fantasies, which centred around the indecent assault and killing of vulnerable women. Inside a drawer, police also found a napkin. Scrawled across it was Julia's nickname, Juju. And keen-eyed investigators also noticed that the carpet had evidently been replaced very recently. They tore it up and discovered the pair hadn't replaced the underlay. On it was a large, dark stain. It was blood. Julia's blood. The pair maintained their innocence, but given the damning evidence, it was clear to investigators that Julia had come to harm there. And so the day after their arrest, the case was passed on to West Midlands Police's homicide team, as they couldn't find proof of life. and Nathan Ellis and David Leesley's charges were upgraded to murder, which is rare in the UK in the absence of a body. The search for Julia's body was paramount, not just for the prosecution but also for her loved ones. But the location of Mission Drive provided an enormous challenge for investigators.
When I was asked to lead on the search for Julia, and I stood at the location she was last seen, which was Mission Drive, Tipton. Within 10 metres of the door of the premises she was in, I had a canal, I had woodland, I had a disused rail line, I had tunnels, I had a large coal deposit area, I had a residential area, I had no CCTV at that point to direct me from which direction Julia may have gone from the flat.
Police used a wide range of specialist technologies, including drones, search teams, other police forces and agencies, search dogs and forensics experts, but it would seem futile. Since it had been almost 2 weeks since her disappearance and their arrest, Nathan and David had had plenty of time to attempt to cover up their crime. But a surprising lead came when Nathan's own mother contacted police to invite them to search her property, as the two men had been there recently to burn things in an incinerator bin. However, they hadn't done a thorough enough job. Police were able to recover remnants of burnt clothing. On the garments they found traces of blood, which was sent for DNA testing. It matched with Julia. Police turned to CCTV once again to piece together Nathan and David's movements in the days following Julia's murder. As they suspected, the pair had used this time to destroy even more evidence. Footage from Oldbury Tip, a trash centre for any US viewers, shows the two men 5 days after Julia's disappearance dumping various items, including rolls of blood-stained carpet and a sofa that police firmly believe would have contained evidence of her murder. Cameras alongside the canal also captured Nathan and David walking from their flat carrying large bags. Neither man was able to give an explanation as to why they were there, what was inside the bags, or why they weren't carrying them on the way back. Following this, officers performed a line search along a large stretch of the canal, as it seemed a likely place they might find her, but they found nothing of importance. After seeing news of the case, a witness eventually came forward. He'd seen two men in a wasteland area near the canal. They were apparently acting strangely and carrying large bags. Police narrowed their search to this area, along with specialist canine support. And on June 12th, 47 days after Julia's disappearance, police announced that they had made a grisly discovery. Body parts were found in several bags hidden in undergrowth up to 20 metres apart. The bags were incredibly well wrapped in thick black material. They were so well preserved that even on a hot day, flies weren't attracted to the remains, and dogs struggled to track the scent. Except one tiny part hadn't been wrapped quite as well, and a specialist canine search dog managed to locate it. By the end of June, all of Julia's remains had been found. Her body was so badly decomposed that pathologists were unable to ascertain the cause of death. In order to find out exactly what had happened to Julia, investigators worked with specialists at Warwick University, who were able to produce highly detailed 3D scans, which allowed them to accurately piece together what had been done to her body. The scans proved that Julia had been cut into 12 pieces. The evidence was damning, and David eventually admitted helping to dispose of Julia's remains, but not to the dismemberment. But the scans showed that she'd been cut up with a wood saw, and that some of the cuts had been made with a disturbing level of precision, whilst others were done with a more amateurish technique. This was enough for police to believe that two people were involved in cutting up her body, and so they were confident David had played a part. Due to the ongoing investigation and eventual trial, Julia was unable to be laid to rest until April 15th, 2020, 11 months after she was killed. Tragically, many of Julia's friends and family were unable to attend her funeral due to the COVID restrictions at that time. Her family said this: Her death has had a devastating impact on us. The mutilation of her body in the callous way in which her remains were scattered has revolted us. We can only pray that Julia knew nothing about these abhorrent acts. We are a close and loving family, clinging to each other in an attempt to support each other through this harrowing ordeal, but shall remain deeply affected and troubled by these events for the rest of our lives, because Julia's loss is felt as keenly today as when we heard she had first gone missing. Initially, when questioned, the two men denied having any knowledge of Julia, but as the evidence mounted up, they both changed their story, telling police that Julia had been at their flat but had died in an accident after slipping and banging her head. They're not the brightest criminals I've ever seen. Shortly before the trial began, Nathan finally admitted to killing Julia. He suggested she went back to the flat and came onto him, which caused a fit of rage. Whether that part is true we may never know, but her cause of death was allegedly from being struck by him in the back of her head with a rolling pin 4 times, after which she was dismembered in the bathtub. He claimed voices in his head told him to do it. His defence would go on to attempt to plead not guilty on the grounds of diminished responsibility. They would also use his Asperger's and other previous mental health diagnoses to bolster the claim. The trial began at Coventry Crown Court in October 2020, lasting about a month. David Leesley refrained from taking the stand, but Nathan Ellis did give testimony. The prosecution argued the attack followed years of pent-up fantasy and desire to reenact horror movies and the sick fantasies Nathan had harboured over some years. Prosecutors told the jury, "The removal of the feet and hands we say would not have helped with disposal because they were bagged up and packed with the respective limbs. We suggest that this scale of dismemberment points clearly towards the gruesome fantasy aspect of the case rather than towards any practical necessity after the death." Prosecutors also suggested that cannibalism may have also played a part. After her remains were found, she was discovered to be missing a kidney. The two men vehemently denied this, and the judge ultimately rejected this claim due to a lack of evidence, but no evidence was provided by either of them as to why the kidney was missing. Throughout the proceedings, neither man showed an ounce of remorse for what they'd done to Julia, nor to the pain they'd caused her loved ones. In fact, the jury were shown evidence that the very day after her brutal murder, Nathan visited another pub, where he spent a couple of hours enjoying himself, drinking and laughing with locals. Witnesses in the pub said that Nathan seemed to be particularly happy that evening. But the judge overseeing the trial suggested it was unlikely that the attack was premeditated, and that it was probably an opportunistic killing, born from the numerous dark fantasies Nathan had played out in his head over many years. Both defendants admitted perverting the course of justice and concealing a body. Nevertheless, following a 4-week trial, both Nathan Maynard-Ellis and David Leesley were found guilty of Julia's murder on the 9th of September 2020. They were also found guilty of concealment, destruction or disposal of a body, and perverting the course of justice. In a shock turn of events, a woman also came forward during the proceedings and accused Nathan of 4 counts of indecent assault, 1 count of attempted indecent assault, and the threat to kill her back in 2007 when she was just 15. And he was also found guilty of these crimes. Both men were sentenced at Warwick Crown Court in December of 2020. Each got life imprisonment, with Nathan Ellis told he must serve at least 30 years and David Leesley a minimum of 19. Following the trial, Detective Inspector Jim Colclough, who led the investigation, said that all murders are obviously very tragic events, not least for the families of the victims involved. But what's been particularly distressing about this investigation is that there were concerted efforts by both men to dispose of Julia's body parts. There was no consideration given to her family. The sole aim of the investigation was to seek justice for Julia. I hope that today provides some solace for her family. Julia was evidently a person with a thirst for life, and this life was cut short due to the dark fantasies of one depraved monster and his accomplice. But thanks to the tenacious efforts of the West Midlands Police, her heinous killers were eventually brought to justice. Thanks so much for stopping by and watching another case here at the Little Shop of Crime. If you learned anything, please take a second to give the video a quick like, and I'll see you again next week with the whole new case. Bye.